Welcome to the third season of Heard Afros and Audio interview series. My guest today is Kay Wilkes. How are you today?
I am doing lovely. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. It's good to
Good.
talk to you. I haven't seen you since October,
Yep.
and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today and get to learn a little bit more about you and Pondering Thoughts Podcast.
Yay.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in. What inspired you to create Pondering Thoughts Podcast, and how did you decide on its focus on engaging stories and thought provoking insights for curious minds?
So, I have always wanted to be an on air personality. So, when I was younger, I grew up in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So, I used to do like local theater as a child. And then when I was a teenager, I was on a teen talk show on BET called Teen Summit.
I
And so,
remember.
I was on Teen Summit. I was one of the posse members. They had a teen panelist. So that really planted the seed of me really wanted to pursue a career in journalism. So I went to college out in California specifically because I wanted to be close to LA because I was like, I'm going to be a star. I thought that was going to be my goal. Went to school there, ended up transferring to school back here in Maryland because I'm in Maryland right now. But I did quite a few internships. I worked in radio for a while in the DC area, moved back out to California to pursue a career in entertainment. I even auditioned to be in MTV. But then life just took different turns and ended up being a teacher, fitness instructor. Just life just moved in a different direction. But that passion for broadcasting really never left. And a couple of years ago, as I was starting to listen to podcasts, I just thought to myself, I was like, why don't I tap into that passion that was already there? So 2023, I said, I'm just going to do it. My uncle always says you need to have a couple used tos in your life. I used to do this, I used to do that. So I was like, I don't want to live a life of regret. So I reached out to someone who already had a podcast, and they were kind of providing me with like consulting services in terms of launching my podcast. And that really gave me the confidence to pursue it. And the interesting thing is the person who was providing these consulting services, they said, once you start your podcast, there's two things you need to do. They say you need to join BPA and you need to go to Afros and Audio. And that was in September. And I will say both Afros and Audios and BPA have been extremely instrumental in my success. I have met so many people that helped me along my journey, but that's really what kind of sparked the interest. The seat was already there, and I just realized I just needed to go for it. So that's what inspired me to do it. And then the second question was the
What made you decide on the focus on engaging stories and thought provoking
okay.
insights?
Yep.
Hmm.
So the focus is that I'm naturally a curious person. So if you listen to my podcast, I always say, greetings, curious minds. Welcome to Pondering Thoughts Podcast. I have a wide range of interests. I say I'm a low key nerd. So I was like, I want to have a platform where I can tap into the topics that are of interest to me. And I have a wide range of interests. So, like in each episode, we focus on a different topic and we really try to dive deeper to challenge people to think deeper about the world around them. So, many times I have people that come on my podcast and we talk about a wide variety of topics. So, I had one person that was on my podcast and we talked about native planting. So, how that's impacting the environment. I had Dr. Chris Marsh, who is a professor at the University of Maryland. She wrote a book called The Love Jones Cohort, and she's studying the black middle class and the single black middle class and how that's impacting generational wealth. I've had Dr. Daniel Swan, who's a professor at Goucher College. We talked about the intersection of race and religion, specifically black atheism. We also talked about the effects of social media. I've had Sarah Fishbond, who is a mosaic artist. So it's a wide range of topics, and sometimes I do solo interviews too. So it's just really a way to just engage people's curiosity. And the other part of that too is that I find that sometimes a lot of content that's out there is either on one side of the spectrum or the other. Like it's either extremely like edgy and just they're trying to sensationalize things, or it's just too ultra conservative or square. I want something in the middle where even though my show isn't a family show per se, I want to have a show where if parents were in the car and their children were in the car listening to it, it will spark their curiosity too. They don't feel like they need to cover their ears. It's just something that can really spark conversation. So that's my goal. And I feel that you don't find a lot of that. It's either on one end or the other end, nothing where you could be in the car, listen to something, and even though the kids may not completely be engaged in it, but it's a topic that maybe sparked their curiosity. And I really want to create a movement where we're starting to think critically, especially now where things are starting to be censored, creating that platform where we can have those type of discussions.
I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. And I really can appreciate your deliberateness in continuing the work that filled you up, made you feel alive in your earlier years, and finding a place for it.
Yep.
And recognizing that podcasting is one of those places where you can be on the mic, where you can indulge your curiosity. All of these things that you want to do can happen right here. And so for choosing podcasts as your medium, because you could do this in a number of ways, right?
Yep.
But it's something about connecting with people, asking those questions in real time, getting your answers in real time, but also showing up with the talents that you have. I really appreciate that you kept moving in that direction, even when life lifed, because that's what happens.
Yep.
But circling back, as you said, is so important. And you did that. So congratulations to you for that. For sure. For sure. So with such a wide range of topics, from literature to cultural phenomena, how do you decide what themes to explore in each episode?
So for me, I focus on things that are of interest to me, that kind of pique my curiosity, and also things that people like my listeners or people that I know have shared with me. So once people listen to my podcast and they get a feel for it, sometimes people I know will say, oh, this would be a good topic to explore. And then I may go and just find a guest that may be able to speak on that topic. Or a lot of times, because I listen to a lot of podcasts and then I may be watching documentary, or I'm a big CBS Sunday morning person. So quite a few of my topics have been inspired by things that I've seen. So for the episode that I did on native planting and rewilding, that was inspired by something I saw on TV. Or I may listen to another podcast and a topic may come up. Sometimes I may just have conversations with people. Like, I'm naturally curious about people. And there have been people that have talked to me about their life. And in my mind, I'm already thinking about a podcast episode. And then I'll ask them to be on the show. So, for example, I'm about to launch season 4. And a person that I'm going to have on the episode is someone who used to be a comedian but has moved into law. So we're going to talk about that transition of working as a comedian and now moving into the law field. So it's just a wide variety of things that naturally pique my curiosity, or things that people have mentioned to me about topics they want me to cover on the show. And I'm like, that's what I like about podcasting. It gives me the opportunity to talk to people that I probably wouldn't be able to talk to in any other way. But having this platform, it gives me an opportunity to connect with so many people. So I'm definitely using it to my advantage.
For sure. And curiosity is such a superpower. It really is, in a way that you will never run out of content because
Agreed.
yeah. As long as you stay curious and are open to those topics that it wouldn't even have come to you, it just begets and begets.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So that's a good thing for people who are interested in podcasting, in creativity in general. Curiosity. Stay curious. Curiosity will never fail you. It really won't.
I agree. And I think if you stay curious, I think it makes life a lot more enjoyable. It makes life more enlightening. Like my great aunt used to always say, what you don't know could fill a world full of books. If you stay curious, the smallest things will pique your curiosity. In this day and age where we are constantly being fed what to think, we need to learn how to stay curious. The more we stay curious, we learn to think critically. That's why I think the arts are important too, because that also sparks a level of curiosity and taps into that creative place. We need to learn how to reimagine the world we want to be in. Curiosity is the foundation of that. There's just so many layers to that.
I agree 100%. It disrupts the socialized, it disrupts the constructs. It disrupts all of that, where you're allowing yourself to take something else in. Maybe you didn't think of it that way before, but maybe it was because you were educated and socialized not to think about it like that before. So here's your opportunity. That's great. The tagline suggests an adventure of stimulating conversations. What do you hope listeners feel or take away after each episode?
Two things. The first thing, I want them to feel smarter. Honestly, like after they listen to an episode, I want them to feel like I have learned something that I can, maybe some little fact or tidbit that I can probably I don't know, share in an upcoming conversation or discourse. So I want them to feel smarter, a little bit more aware, and also wanted to pique their curiosity. There are quite a few people that have listened to my podcast, and after they listen to it, they're like, I have never heard of X, Y, and Z topic, or I have never met anyone who was in this specific type of field. So that makes me feel good because I was like, mission accomplished. It is your curiosity has been piqued. And if nothing else, you may have never even heard of the person that I had on the show. So in that sense, you're still learning something new. So even if you're familiar with the topic, you may not have heard of this person. So that's something new. I just feel like there's always something new that you can learn. So that's what I want people to take away from it. I want them to feel a little smarter, and I want it to be their curiosity.
Yeah, no, that's great. That intentionality behind it is so important. And when you started the podcast, and congratulations on moving into season 4.
Thank you.
That's a major win for you. Most people aren't able to get to that point for whatever reasons. So I just really want to say thank you for staying with it and
Thank
still
you.
being a part of this industry because it's important. But yeah, the intentionality of expanding folks' worldview is so important. It makes the world a better place when we're able to understand different people's mindsets, experiences, and all of that. Because, for a lot of us, we're just walking around in our own bubbles, just trying to survive, carve out our own piece of the world. But that little piece of expansion allows us to go further. So I really respect that intentionality behind the podcast that you've
Thank
created.
you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you shared that podcasting has helped you embrace your voice and gain confidence. How has this transformation influenced the way you craft your episodes?
Whew. I think a couple things. I think it's allowing me to feel a little bit more comfortable in my skin. I feel for the most part I've always been a relatively confident person, but we all have our insecurities. And when you are creating a podcast, you want to be authentic to yourself. Sometimes it can be a little challenging because you're just teetering in terms of like how much you're going to share about yourself. So I think it's really challenged me to be true to myself, not get too caught up in followers per se, because even from a social media standpoint, like prior to starting a podcast, I really wasn't that engaged on social media. But then once I got on social media, I had to put myself out there a little bit more. And then I was always like questioning myself, should I put this out there? What are people going to think? So then I had to let it go. And my sister kept saying, she said, your tribe will find you. Just be yourself. And then sometimes showing up as a person of color, you are always wondering in terms of what will be received. What do people want? And I was like, it's not about what people want. You got to think about that to a certain degree, but who am I and how do I want to show up? So, for example, I'm like, okay, do I come across as a little too square? I'm just being honest. Am I a little too square? Do I seem a little too uptight? All these things are going through my mind, but I was like, all I can be is who I am. And just being comfortable in that. And just going back to afros and audios, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but just even going to the festival, I think it's helped me just seeing that diversity of voices. And that even helped me feel a lot more confident in my voice too, because it ranges the spectrum. You have people who may be blurs, like black nerds, to people who may be really edgy, to people who are like in the middle with all these wide interests. And I didn't go to HBCU. I went to a predominantly white institution. So for me, I was like, this is probably what it would have been like to go to HBCU, where it's just like all of us are just together, focusing on the same goal, diverse interests. It felt like I could just relax. And each time I've gone to the festival, I feel like I've gotten a lot more comfortable with my voice, and I've networked with people outside the festival that have kind of helped me to craft that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. Shout out to your sister for pushing you, for sure. And yeah, it's so important to be who you are inside of this, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what folks, when you think about podcasting and our listeners and who chooses, they're actually choosing you. That means that I've already accepted you. Your goal is to accept yourself. I've
True.
already accepted who you are and I'm enjoying it. That's the mindset. Again, we've got to work through those, and things like this where you begin to express, it's going to stretch you. The things that you
Yes.
thought you'd never do, the people you thought you'd never
Definitely.
talk to, it stretches you. Once you start stretching, the rest becomes history
Right.
at a certain point.
Yep.
But you got to start. That's how you finish. That's how you get through it. And so, yeah, it's really important. These things are spoken about out loud, because I think about it like double dutch. That person just standing there jumping on the side is like, you gonna jump in at some point? That would be me. So I can resonate.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yes.
sure. So you said podcasting has reignited your creativity and passion. And you've talked about that a bit. How do you keep your ideas fresh and ensure your content continues to resonate with your audience? You're in your fourth season. How do you feel about it? Are you thinking when you approach it, are you always thinking about the improvement, the what's next?
Oh, absolutely. So even before launching season 4, but I was like, I just need to take a pause for the call. So I have someone who is helping me with my audio editing. So he and I will meet and we'll go over some ideas. A couple of people I've met through Afros and audio that I've just connected with behind the scene in terms of crafting maybe a new intro that really reflects my personality. So that's been the biggest thing. Like after each episode, just from feedback I'm getting or just listening to other people and sometimes even questions that people ask me. So for example, one thing that people have asked me quite often as it relates to my podcast, when I explain to them what the podcast is, sometimes they look at me puzzled. They were like, okay, especially people in the podcasting space, how do you need to have like more of a niche market? So when people are asking me certain questions, then that's a sign to me, okay, maybe there's something that's not clear. So what do I need to work on based on those questions? If I'm getting asked the same questions, that's when I step back. I'm like, okay, what isn't clear about my delivery? What isn't clear about my pitch? What are the questions that people constantly ask me that I feel like is a miss? So I've just been trying to take time to step back, reevaluate that, connect with other people in the space that I feel that can help me with that to make sure it's very focused.
Most of life is experiencing and experimenting,
Yeah.
right? So you can't know what you don't know until you
Right.
know it. Therein lies the opportunity to have that feedback loop, to actually
Yep.
listen to people who want to see you win. There's things that's not for me, that's
Right.
just your thoughts. There are things that you're already considering yourself, and the universe so happens to download it for you through a person or through an experience. It's so necessary. And so it is up to us to be willing to accept those areas of improvement because in all things, we do the conference every year. It gets to look different, better,
Mm-hmm.
improved, or more transformative. That's the opportunity of the creative. Like I said, you're in it, you're doing the work. That's really cool that season 4, season 5, season 6, I'm claiming it for you as you keep moving this forward. That it will start to shift the same way as we do. As the more we experience, the we change, we shift. And so why wouldn't our creativity reflect that?
I totally agree. And in terms of keeping the topics fresh, just getting back to what I was saying earlier, because I'm naturally a curious person, I feel like I probably will never run out of things to talk about. So because it isn't super niche, that kind of works to my advantage, but I still want people to know what to expect when they listen to the podcast. So I think right now at this point, that's what I'm trying to flesh out. As I move into season 4, I want people to know what to expect. Full transparency, it's a work in progress. So I know that's something that I am working through to make sure it's very clear. So when people listen to the podcast, they know what to expect. And then also balancing out connecting with me because I can tend to be somewhat of a private person. So just trying to find that fine line of sharing yourself, but also not oversharing because sometimes honestly I think people share a little bit too much. I'm like, okay, I didn't need to know the greens that you had with your mac and cheese, and
Right.
it's a little bit too much oversharing, but you do what's comfortable for you, so just finding that balance as well.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. So, what is the key to crafting stories and conversations that keep your listeners endlessly curious and engaged?
I think it's a couple of things. Listening to what people are sharing with you in terms of what's sparking their curiosity. And then sometimes when I'm looking at the feedback from the number of downloads from certain episodes, I'm like, okay, this is something that people would like. So for me, some of it is actual research, going out there, seeing what people are interested in. Some of it is anecdotal, just based on what people have shared with me. So I think it's like a combination of both. And I think both of them serve a good purpose too in terms of me determining what would work best as I
Hmm.
move forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you talked about this in the beginning about your career and how you started out one way, and then life became what life becomes
Yep.
and started doing the things that I'm sure paid the bills.
Yep.
And I'm curious about that diverse career background from teaching to radio. How has it shaped your unique perspectives to bring the podcast to life?
Yeah, so since I've had what I call a colorful resume, because I've done quite a few things, and the funny thing is because I've had so many different careers, like right now working human resource, and I've been in human resources for a while now. But when I talk to people and I was like, oh, yeah, I used to do that, they were like, how many careers have you had? They're like, you were a doctor too? When I was younger, there was a woman she was almost like an aunt to me. She was an anthropologist. And I remember when I was younger and I would be around her, she would talk about all these different careers that she had. It just seemed so far fetched. As I got older and I had different careers, I realized that I think it just ties into me being naturally curious. Like I always felt like the world is my oyster. I'm just going to go for it, try things out. So I think I'm just a naturally curious person. And I think that does feed into my podcast too, because I'm always just fascinated by different things, different people. I think that keeps my perspective fresh because I'm never really getting bored with life or what life can teach me. And I just always feel like there's so much to learn. So I do think
Hmm.
that background, it also shows my ability to navigate different situations and settings. So even when I'm interviewing different types of guests, because I've had a varied background, sometimes there's stuff I can pull from the past that can even serve as a icebreaker as I'm talking to them. They may have a similar background. So I think it's served in many purposes in terms of my curiosity and just the ability to connect because I've had, like I said, a colorful resume.
I talked to you, and you've met my son. He's been to the conference twice now. He's 23 years old, and he just believes that he must know what life is about. And I'm like, son, I'm not doing what I did and was so passionate about at 20.
Right.
I'm not doing what I thought and was so passionate about at 30.
Right.
I'm not even doing what at my big age, getting closer to 50 than I am to 40 at this point.
Right.
I'm not even doing what I thought was my life at 40. Life is going to
Right.
shift and change. You have no idea how many lifetimes you're going to have in this one life.
That is so true. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that you just want people to be with their experience because it's going to change, it's going to shift. Just be with it.
I'm going to write that down like that. Be with your experience.
Yeah, sure. I have this really strong philosophy about pursuing the life you want to experience. They say life is short, but it's the longest thing you or I are going to actually experience. How can we be in pursuit of that, whatever that looks like? It's so important for folks like yourself, where we are in our life now, to speak it again out loud. Someone else hears it and says, oh, okay, let me chill. So I appreciate you sharing that because it's important for everyone, even those at our big age. We're still in that process of becoming. It,
Right.
it doesn't end until we end, which
That's
is our good news.
that's a pondering thought.
Oh yeah, I got plenty of them. I consider myself a philosopher, and critical thought is my jam. So we resonated right off the top.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with literature as one of your featured themes, are there any books? I love books. I'm an author myself that have deeply influenced the way you think or approach storytelling.
So I'll just start off by telling you some of my favorite authors and books and like how that may influence me as a person. That may somewhat
Hmm.
influence my storytelling or just my life in general. So one of my favorite books is Their Eyes Are Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. So I remember reading that book when I was in high school, and I just read it because I had to read it. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Then when I was in college, I was an English major with a focus on the African diaspora, and I read it again. Then when I was in my 20s, I read it again. And I've read it almost every decade. And the reason why I bring that up is because when I read that book at different stages of my life, I understand the main character in the book. The woman, I guess she was in her 20s or 30s or 40s, I'm assuming. But in each phase of her life, she was in a different relationship. And you can see how that different relationship shaped her and the reason why she got in those relationships. Then I think about myself as an adult, just getting to what you were talking about, just kind of being comfortable with your experience in life. And I just realized how we progress through life. We make different decisions based on where we are, even the people that we're in relationship with. So it really helps me to embrace the journey of life. And so when I think about the way I approach storytelling from a podcasting standpoint, each episode or each season is different too. I'm evolving. Season one, I was maybe in the first stage of my life, like the character, their eyes are watching God. Season two, my needs may be a little different. Season three, I'm a bit more mature. I may not need the things I needed in season one, but that shapes the way I approach my life and storytelling too. That's one of my favorite books. and also like a lot of Dan Brown books. He wrote the Da Vinci Code and stuff, and that really just challenged the way I thought about things that I've been taught, that have been indoctrinated in my life. So it helped me to think more critically. And so when I think about my podcast, the people I have on my pod, it's very conversational. So we're just talking. I let them lead, but I like to have people and topics that get people to think critically. So I think the authors that I'm attracted to, and some I like fun novels too, but that kind of approach is the way I try to craft my story, the way I approach the guests that I have on my show.
Yeah. Shout out to Zora Neale Hurston. I had a interview with Yanni Washington in the last season of Heard. And we were talking about Zora Neale Hurston, and it was just a weekend before when we had this interview so I joked about it. And my wife had gone off to a conference, and I was like, my wife is away from home, and I'm sitting here watching Zora Neale Hurston documentaries. I'm like, okay, you could probably be doing something else, go to the bar, but no, I want to sit here and watch Zora Neale Hurston documentaries.
I can appreciate that.
yeah. Because what a mind. And one of the things that really stood out to me about Zora Neale Hurston, and it's something that I feel for myself as well. And she said, if I had the resources, if I just had the resources that I needed to do the work that I wanted to do, I would have done so much more. What you see is me cobbling things together. And when people support me, because she has some benefactors and stuff that were conditional, of course. Right. And if I had the resources, y'all ain't seen nothing. And I bring that up to say it just speaks to the spirit and the determination of us as creatives.
Absolutely. Especially Black creatives too. The way that we can just take what may seemingly be scraps and just make the best of it. Another author that I'm starting to get into now, especially just given the climate, is James Baldwin.
Oh, that's my man.
Oh my gosh. So I read, I think, was it The Fire? Was it The Fire Next?
Fire Next Time. Yeah, my daughter just finished reading that. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. But I was like, whew, that is resonating with me on such a deep level right now. And I want to get a lot more into his work because I think this is also just going to help me navigate where we are in the world right now, where I am as a Black woman showing up in this space. So I think that's someone that I haven't really gotten into, but I feel like that's going to be on my top list to read. Just out of curiosity, I know you said you're an author and you enjoy books too. What are your top 3 or top 4?
Gloria Naylor, Mama Day, Toni Morrison, A Song of Solomon is one of my favorite. Toni Morrison in general, but Song of Solomon. James Baldwin, Another Country. And I read a lot. I've been reading a lot, but those will be my top. If I had a Mount Rushmore of authors, it would. If you've never read Gloria Naylor's Mama Day, it will change your life.
Okay.
If you've never read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, it will change your life. James Baldwin's Another Country. It's a great story, and also the way that the story is written and told. It's just the creativity inside of it, just the genius is amazing. So yeah, I listen to a lot of Audible's books because just like podcasting, it supports in not being able to just sit and do something. Right. I can go and listen. It's so important. When people say, have you read books, and kind of dismiss the listening, I'm like, I'm consuming what's happening. I'm consuming the literature here. Whether I'm reading it or I'm listening to it, don't play with me. But yeah, other storytellers, and you getting further into James Baldwin, his courageousness in speaking.
Yes, and yes. Now that I'm watching quite a few clips of interviews with him, like from the 60s, and I think about his boldness, especially given the time period he was in, I was like, whew, we take it for granted. We take it for granted.
Oh, yeah.
A lot.
They created under the cloud of segregation and Jim Crow. And they did it with dignity. They put it out there no matter what. I remember watching a Dr. Maya Angelou, and she talked about being in, I think it was the Selma protests, and how the police were on their horses and they were menacing and messing with them. And she said she took the pin out of her hair. I won't go into what she did, but she did something to that police officer and that horse that made them have to stop and deal with it. And I'm like, the courage, the courage of all of these people. And what they had was community. That's what's so important about even the conferences that we come there, we get fed, we get
Yeah.
fueled because this world does not love us. And so how do we love one another? How do we
That's
encourage
right.
and be in community with one another? So our ancestors are definitely those folks that we get to keep in our cabinet of advisors.
Yes.
Yeah, because they've been important and instrumental. We went down a rabbit hole with that, but I appreciate it.
That is absolutely fine. I was like, I didn't mean to flip it and interview
No,
you,
it's
but
all
then we
good.
brought up books. I was like, I love books. I was like, so
Yeah.
pray do tell.
No, it's all good. I love it. And that's what this is about. And like you said, there's opportunities for these conversations and to get to know each other beyond what we think we
Absolutely.
know of each other. And so I appreciate us taking that detour. I don't mind it at all.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we just talked about the courage of our ancestors, but also the courage of us. We can't take
Yeah.
for granted either that we are, just by expressing ourselves, that is a revolutionary act in a lot of ways. And so your mantra is do it afraid, which is so empowering and so important. So can you share a specific instance when fear almost held you back and how you found the courage to move forward?
Whew. Golly, I can think of quite a few instances. So, just going back to my sister's, the one that always encouraged me to do it afraid. So, I would say, just even bringing it back to the podcast, just even sometimes being a little bit more vulnerable and some of the things I may share. Again, I don't need to be like an open book. I think some things you need to keep close to the vest, but I would say even just starting a podcast, I think that was me just being able to do it afraid. There were certain times when I may want to express myself a certain way and then I'll hold back because in my mind I have this narrative. What are they going to think? Is it going to come across as a little too forced, a little too contrived? And then I'm like, just be you. So that has really been the thing that has helped me, like just really being okay being myself. Sometimes we can appear to be the most confident person, but all of us have our insecurities, period, point blank. So for me, doing it afraid was just really learning how to show up as my true self in the podcast. Sometimes you look at other people too, you're like, wait a minute, more people are gravitating towards them. Do I need to do this? And I was like, but that's not who I am. I'm not super edgy. I'm not ultra conservative. I'm just me. And I think sometimes we need that balance because I think sometimes we don't see a lot of that, especially when people look like us. Like sometimes you feel like you have to drop all these certain expletives or whatever to be relatable, to keep it real. And if that's you, then people relate to that. People can feel the authenticity. But I was like, I can only be myself, and then just not let people define what it means to be Black or how I need to show up as a Black woman. Like, for example, I'm not trying to go off on a rabbit hole, but I think this kind of ties into it. I don't listen to a lot of current hip hop music. So sometimes like people like spit off stuff and I'm like living under a rock. You tell me about a Tribe Called Quest song or Diggable Planets, I'm your girl. Some of the other stuff, I don't know, but sometimes people, just the way you show up. So I think I digressed a little bit, but getting back to what you're saying, the reason why I was bringing that up is because sometimes I think people have expectations in terms of who you should be, what you should like, and how you should show up because of your race. And I put race in quotation marks because we all know it's a human construct, but just showing up as a Black person. But I think for me, just really being confident in the way I show up. And it's a daily struggle sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm always thinking about almost every episode, but I just say, you can only be who you are. And I just getting back to my sister, she said, your tribe will find you.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing.
For sure, finding that freedom and that liberation, because that is something that we all should be in pursuit of, is being liberated, and especially liberated as a creator, since what you create is the expression of you. It's your platform, it's your podcast, and the opportunity there is to really recognize it as such. It's yours. You created it. It's your voice. It's your thoughts. And so however it appears, there's a lid for every pot, as my wife says. As the representative can only show up for a certain amount of time before it goes away and there you are again.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And we're asked to perform in so many areas of our lives, from work to even home, family, wherever we are, we're asked to perform. The more we perform, the less of us we become. So it's important that we find one space, at least. Please find several, but if you can find one space where you are not having to perform, it is very liberating. So kudos to you on growing and
Yeah.
discovering yourself inside of this, because why else are we doing this if we
Right.
can't
You're
have that
right. You're
experience?
right. That freedom, like you said, just showing up as our liberated selves. That's so
Hmm.
true. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
agree.
Okay, so for aspiring podcasters hesitant to start, what practical advice would you give to help them turn their curiosity into meaningful content?
You said for inspiring podcasters?
Yes.
I would say, since we're on a curious theme, follow your curiosity. So, what is it that you're really curious about? Because if it's something that you're really curious about, that's something that you'll be passionate about. And that's something that will drive you in terms of your actual podcast. So, follow your curiosity. And just getting back to being true to yourself. I know people may tell you should do a podcast about this, or you seem like you like to talk about this. What do you want to do? What would really keep you motivated each and every day? What would really inspire you to want to get behind that mic? So I would say follow your curiosity and just see where your curiosity leads.
Hmm.
They say life isn't a destination, it's a journey. So just enjoy that journey. So I
Yeah,
would say curiosity.
absolutely. So I have a kind of, this is going to be a question.
All
It's going to be a
right. I'm
question.
ready. All right. Mm-hmm.
If you could host an episode with a dream guest, dead or
Ooh.
alive, who would it be and what would you discuss?
Gosh, I already know. Off the top, it would be Wynton Marsalis, who is a jazz trumpeter. He's actually one of my favorite jazz artists. And I would really just love to pick his brain about his experience, his journey in jazz, how he's seen things evolve. And Wynton Marsalis is also a huge intellectual beyond jazz. I've seen interviews with him when he's talked about just a wide variety of things. I would love to see what keeps him motivated to keep doing what he's doing. When he started as a performer, I think jazz was a little bit more popular per se. Things have tapered off. There's still those of us who love jazz, but I would just love to pick his brain about just life. Honestly, he seems like a true intellectual, so it would definitely be Wynton Marsalis. And if
Okay,
you
I love
have,
what's
if
in.
anyone's listening to this and they have connect, tell them to listen to Pondering Thoughts Podcast. It'll be Wynton
Yes.
Marsalis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this belief that if they exist and you exist, there's access, there's
Mm.
opportunity. Shoot your shot. And I'm glad you throw that out as a call to action, because why not?
You're the second person who said that to me, and they used that exact term because they asked me that question. I mentioned Wynton Marsalis, and they said the same thing you said, Talib. They said, shoot your shot. So I think
Hmm.
that's confirmation that I may need to do it afraid, huh?
There you go. It's been so great talking to you. I've
Likewise.
enjoyed this conversation. I have one last question for you before I ask you to tell people how to listen to the podcast, how to find you, social media, and all that good stuff. For new listeners of Pondering Thoughts Podcast, what episode would you recommend they start with to truly understand the essence of your show?
Sure. So this was actually in season 1. I did an interview with someone who used to be a private investigator. So it was actually one of my first or second interview I did with a guest, but I think that was one of my original episodes. But I think you can really get a feel for me, my interview style, the platform of the show. So I would say start with that one. That was a really fun, enjoyable conversation, and my guest was very enjoyable too. So I said that would be a good one to start with. I like that question.
Nice. It's not often that people reference that first season or the first couple
Right.
episodes. Most times they're like, don't listen to none of this stuff. I didn't get
I thought
it.
about that too. I was like, do it? But I was like, that was actually fun. That may
Yeah.
pique their interest too.
Absolutely. No, but
Yeah.
I love that. And it speaks to subconscious and conscious. You're on the right track. You started something that is for you and you're doing the work. And to be able to recognize that, yeah, season 1, go check that out.
Thank
It's
you.
good too. So tell folks how they can listen to Pondering Thoughts and where to find you.
Sure. So I am on most major platforms. So if you want to listen to Pondering Thoughts Podcast, I'm on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Haytai, HAYTI, which is podcast for Black creators. So make sure you check that one out too. So I am on those platforms. In terms of social media, you can find me. I'm primarily on Instagram. I'm still trying to build up Facebook. So on Instagram is at Pondering Thoughts Podcast. Website should be coming out soon, but Instagram is primarily where I'm a lot more active. But hey, if you want to follow me on Facebook, that may increase the engagement, so you can follow me on Facebook too. But I'm a lot more active on Instagram. But yep, at Pondering Thoughts Podcast. And again, pretty much most major platforms you can listen to Pondering Thoughts Podcast.
All right. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.